After the release of Mega Man X5 in 2000, it was Keiji Inafune's intention to have it be the end of the X series, as well as a lead-in to a new series of Mega Man games that starred the real protagonist. That obviously didn't happen, as Capcom instead went behind Inafune's back to make X6 and then 4 more games in the X series, leaving Inafune's project without a developer. Instead, a new one for his project was contracted, Inticreates, and their game released worldwide in 2002 was Mega Man Zero. Mega Man Zero was the first of a planned trilogy of Mega Man games drafted by Inafune for the Game Boy Advance, though it was eventually expanded to include a 4th title, and then a sequel series. You now take the role of Zero exclusively, instead of just Zero and maybe sometimes X as in X4 and 5. The story concerns the reawakening of Zero some hundreds of years after the X series by a young scientist CL. A new government called Neo Arcadia rules in a near post-apocalyptic world scourged by a series of conflicts called the Elf Wars, so named for the use of cyber elves, cybernetic sentient programs that drastically improved the functions of Reploids. CL sought out Zero due to legends around him from the Elf Wars, and believes he can help her resistance movement against the ever-increasingly authoritarian Neo Arcadia, which because of an energy crisis has taken to heavy discrimination and rampant maverick branding of Reploids. Zero agrees to help the Resistance, despite, or perhaps because, he has no memory of his life due to the long hibernation, and through his guerrilla actions against Neo Arcadia, he eventually faces their generals, the Four Guardians, and Neo Arcadia's leader, an evil copy of his former friend and ally, X. The story, as you can tell, is much darker and detailed compared to previous Mega Man games. In fact, Japanese copies of the game actually had enemies bleed when slashed at. The art is also much sharper and detailed. Zero in particular was given a redesign to make him appear more human-like, as well as to differentiate this world from the previous series. Compared to every previous Mega Man game, the Zero series handled much differently. The biggest change in my opinion is the speed. The Zero series feels and plays much faster than the classics or X series, almost to the point where it can feel like Sonic the Hedgehog crossed with Mega Man. This also extends into the action as well. Zero has traditionally been presented as a glass cannon in most media, and this game is no exception. You start with a minuscule health bar and can be taken out very easily. This also extends to enemies as well though, as Zero can eliminate most normal foes in a single saber slash, and most bosses can fall surprisingly quickly. In that regard, the traditional power-up after bosses is also done away with. Instead, there is an elemental system. Thunder beats fire, fire beats ice, and ice beats thunder. Most bosses have an element associated with them, and thus a weakness. And over the game, you gain chips which apply elemental effects to your weapons, allowing you to attack the boss's weakness. The Zero series, in turn, is much more skill-based. The end of each stage gives you a detailed breakdown and assigns a rank from C to S depending on how well you completed the mission, which encourages repeat playthroughs as you learn to efficiently run through stages quickly, but not recklessly. Aside from all that, the game plays very similarly to the X series. You can run, jump, shoot, slash, dash, and wall kick. But in addition to Zero's Buster Shot and Saber, you will also acquire 2 other weapons, the Triple Rod that can attack in all 8 directions, and the Shield Boomerang, which when held reflects enemy fire. Zero is also able to charge all his weapons now, which in addition to dealing great damage will imbue elemental properties to your attack. The last major addition is the Cyber Elf system. Throughout the game you will find Cyber Elves that provide various benefits to Zero. Most are one-time use, healing Zero, providing a floating turret that attacks enemies, or stage-affecting variants like changing all the regular enemies into Meteors. Cyber Elves with permanent upgrades to Zero must be fed E-crystals that you can find in stages or pick up from defeated enemies, and have effects such as increasing your maximum health or putting shields over every spike trap. However, despite all these being great additions to a new series, I can't help but notice that they were handled very poorly in Zero 1. For one, the big new Cyber Elf system is fundamentally limited for one huge reason. Every elf that upgrades Zero himself requires E-crystals, from 750 to the biggest going up to 3,000. And a typical playthrough of the game with no grinding will maybe have you acquire around 600 to 800 crystals in total. If you actually want to take advantage of the Cyber Elves, you'll need to perform tons of tedious grinding in the desert for E-crystals. I've done the math. If you want to fully upgrade every elf, you'll need 27,900 crystals. And there are 2 values of packs you'll find in the game. 4, and 16. But even accessing Zero's basic abilities requires grinding. As explained by his amnesia, Zero starts only able to perform single saber slashes and basic buster shots. You need to upgrade your weapon skill by grinding enemies, which will eventually unlock Zero's saber combo, spinning slashes, and charged attacks. It makes sense in the story, but it's really just so unnecessary in the grand scheme. The stage design is also downright brutal and unfair in most levels, owing to Zero's rather limited movement compared to the X games and later entries in the Zero series. Zero doesn't have a double jump anymore, and air dashing was removed, but the stage hazards and obstacles just beg for you to be able to do them. And while there are a few exceptions, most bosses provide little to no challenge if you can exploit their elemental weakness with charged attacks. In this and all the previous issues, I find Zero One very comparable to Mega Man X6. In my eyes, both games were very promising, with lots of new and interesting features that just didn't utilize them well, and had insane stage difficulty with mostly pathetic boss fights. And finally, while the Zero series has provided some of the best music in the whole Mega Man franchise, I find Zero One to be pretty lackluster in this regard, save for a couple tracks. Keep in mind, I'm not saying Zero One is a bad game by any stretch. It's just heavily flawed to the point that I don't really enjoy it much compared to the other entries in the series. But whatever my thoughts on the game are, Mega Man Zero was a breakthrough success, earning high praise and leading to 3 direct sequels, which I will talk about next episode.